Hi friends, today we are going to see process validation and requirements in the pharmaceutical industry. There are good manufacturing practices guidelines on the validation which describes how the process validation is carried out. Process validation may mostly describe in the process validation, prospective validation, concurrent validation and retrospective validation. So the process validation, collection and evaluation of data throughout the product life cycle, which provides documented scientific evidence that a process is capable of consistently and delivering quality products. However, prospective validation carried out during the development of the product, the pharma product development, so, on the basis of risk analysis of the production process, which is broken down into the individual steps, these are then evaluated on the basis of past experience and to determine whether they may lead a critical situation. Concurrent validation is carried out during the routine production of the pharmaceutical products. Retrospective process validation is a method to confirm the reliability and the consistency of a manufacturing process by analyzing historical production, quality control, and process data of a product already in the distribution or in use. It is typically used for well-established legacy product. Where is retrospective validation applicable? For the legacy product that were not validated according to the contemporary standard when they were introduced. Verification of electronic tools for 10 to 20 batches that there is a documented evidence that the process consistently produces a quality product. In details, prospective concurrent retrospective validation approach. Prospective, concurrent, and retrospective validation are three different approaches to conducting process validation in the pharmaceutical and medical devices industries. Below is an example or explanation for each approach. Prospective validation involves the validation of manufacturing process before commercial production begins or a new process is implemented when prospective validation is applicable for the new product. It is typically carried out for a new products, new equipment or significant changes to existing process. The goal is to establish documented evidence that the process consistently produces the desired results within predetermined specifications and quality attributes. Prospective validation typically follows a systematic approach, starting from process design and continuing through installation qualification, that is IQ, operation qualification OQ, and performance qualification PQ. The process parameters and critical control points are identified, and extensive testing and data collection are performed to demonstrate the process capability and consistency. The validation results form the basis for process approval and subsequent commercial manufacturing. Concurrent validation involves the validation of manufacturing process that is already in a routine production and it is performed while actual production is ongoing, with the purpose of evaluating the process performance and ensuring its ongoing control and compliance. Concurrent validation is often conducted when changes are made to the process, equipment, or materials, or when new batches or lots are introduced. In concurrent validation, the process is monitored and evaluated in real time with a focus on collecting process data and assessing its variability. Statistical process control techniques such as control charts and trend analysis are commonly used to analyze the data and determine the process stability and capability. Any deviations or out of specification results are investigated and corrective actions are implemented to maintain the process control. Retrospective validation. Retrospective validation involves the validation of a manufacturing process based on historical data and records. It is typically performed when a process has been routine production for a significant period without formal validation, or when there is a need to validate an existing process that lacks documented validation evidence. Means when retrospective is applicable for your existing process to validate the existing process. In retrospective validation, existing production data, batch records, and other relevant documentation are reviewed and analyzed to assess the process performance and consistency. The aim is to determine if the process has consistently produced products that meet the desired quality attributes and specifications. Data analysis, statistical technique, and other evaluation methods are employed to identify any trends, variability, or potential issues in the historical data. If the retrospective evaluation indicates additional validation activities may be required to ensure process control and compliance. Each approach to process validation has its advantages and considerations. Prospective validation ensures that the process is thoroughly evaluated and optimized before commercial production. Concurrent validation provides real-time assessment and control during routine production, and retrospective validation allows for validation based on historical data. The selection of the appropriate validation approach depends on the factors such as the stage of process, regulatory requirement, and specific circumstances of the manufacturing operation. Relationship between validation and qualification. In general, qualification and validation follows similar underlying principles. The term qualification is normally used, for example, for equipment and utilities, and validation, for example, for the systems, methods, and process. Hope you clear about the validation and qualification. Qualification normally precedes validation. Qualification and validation should be performed in a structured way according to the documented protocols and procedures. Qualification and validation as appropriate should be performed for new premises, equipment and utilities, for new system, methods, processes and procedures. When changes are made depending on the outcome of risk assessment, where necessary or indicated based on the outcome of periodic review, and may include requalification and revalidation. Process validation, like validations and qualification, should be done in accordance with predetermined protocols and the results appropriately documented in the reports. There should be an appropriate and effective quality management system supporting the organization, planning, execution, and management of qualification and validation. Qualification and validation should be performed in a structured way according to the documented protocol and documentation. Documents associated with qualification and validation may include validation master plan, standard operating procedures, SOPs, specifications, protocols, and reports, risk assessment outcomes, process flowcharts, operator manuals, training records, calibration procedures and records, sampling plans, testing plans and methods, statistical methods, and results, historical history of qualification and validation, plan for ensuring maintaining a validated state, including review of validation status. At least 3 consecutive applications of the validation or cleaning procedure should be performed and shown to be successful to prove that the method is validated. Yeah. Qualification and validation protocol. There should be qualification and validation protocols describing the qualification and validation to be performed. As minimum, the protocol should be appropriate for qualification and validation to executed to be executed and may include the following significant background information. A unique document number and version number should be there. Objective and scope should be clear. The site should be mentioned, the responsible personnel, a reference to applicable standard operating procedures, equipment or instruments to be used should be recorded, a reference to the standard as appropriate should be recorded, the stage of validation and qualification to be mentioned, the process and parameters should be mentioned, sampling, testing, and monitoring requirements should be mentioned, stress testing where appropriate should be recorded, calibration requirements should be mentioned, predetermined acceptance criteria for drawing conclusions, change control, deviations, if any during the qualification or validation should be recorded in the report. Attachment and reference to the attachment, including data, source data, wherever applicable, archiving and retention should be done. The protocol should be approved by responsible person, including the quality unit. Prior to use, any changes to a protocol should be approved prior to the implementation of the change. Qualification and validation reports. Reports should reflect the protocol and procedures followed and include at least the title and objective of the study, reference to the protocol, reference to the appropriate risk assessment, details of the material and equipment, programs and cycle, use, procedures and test methods, data, changes and deviations, out of specification, non-conformances results should be mentioned. Appropriate traceability and a conclusion should be mentioned. Results should be recorded in the compliance with good data and record management practices. Results should be reviewed, analyzed and compared against the predetermined acceptance criteria, interpreted and statistically analyzed wherever applicable. Results should meet the acceptance criteria. Out of specification, out of limit should be documented and investigated according to appropriate procedures. If these are accepted, these should be justified. Where necessary, further studies should be considered. Revalidation should be done based on the identified need and principles of risk management. Any changes made to the, for example, procedures, processes and methods should be managed through the change control procedure. The extent of validation or revalidation as a result of such changes should be determined based on the principles of risk management. The sampling plan should be including sampling points, number of samples, and the frequency of sampling for each unit operation and attribute should be mentioned in the protocol. The number of samples should be adequate to provide sufficient statistical confidence of quality both within a batch and between the batches. The confidence level selected can be based on risk analysis as it relates to the particular attribute under examination. Sampling during this stage should be more extensive than is typical during the routine production. Criteria and process performance indicators that allowed for a science and risk-based decision about the ability of the process to consistently produce quality products. The criteria should include a description of the statistical methods to be used in analyzing all collected data. Statistical metrics defining both intra-batch and inter-batch availability, provision for addressing deviation from expected conditions and handling of non-conforming data. Data should not be excluded from further consideration in terms of product performance qualification without a documented science-based justification. Execution of the PPQ protocol should not begin until the protocol has been reviewed and approved by all appropriate departments, including the quality unit. Any departure from the protocol must be made according to established procedures or provisions in the protocol. Normal operating conditions should include the utility system, that is air handling system, water system, material, personnel, environment, and manufacturing procedures. State a clear conclusion as to whether the data indicates the process met the conditions established in the protocol and whether the process is considered to be a state of control. If not, the report should state what should be accomplished before such a conclusion can be reached. The conclusion should be based on a documented justification for the approval of the process and release a lots produced by it to the market in consideration of the entire compilation of knowledge and information gained from the design stage through the process qualification stage. Maintenance of the facility, utilities and equipment is another important aspect of ensuring that a process remains in control. Concurrent release of PPQ batches. In most cases, the PPQ study needs to be completed successfully and a high degree of assurance in the process achieved before commercial distribution of a product. In special situations, the PPQ protocol can be designed to release a PPQ batch for distribution before complete execution of the protocol steps and activities. That is the concurrent release. FDA expects that concurrent release will be used rarely. Concurrent release might be appropriate for process use infrequently for various reasons, such as manufacturing drug for which there is a limited demand, that is the orphan drug, minor use, minor species, veterinary drug, for which have a short half-lives. Radiopharmaceuticals including positron emission tomography drugs. Concurrent release might also be appropriate for drugs that are medically necessary and are being manufactured in coordination with the agency to alleviate a short supply. Analytical methodology. Process knowledge depends on an accurate and precise measuring technique used to test and examine the quality of drug component in process materials and finished products. Validated analytical methods are not necessarily required during the product process development activities or when used in characterization studies. Nevertheless, analytical methods should be scientifically sound, specific, sensitive and accurate and provide results that are reliable. There should be assurance of proper equipment function for a laboratory equipments, procedures for an analytical method and equipment maintenance and documentation practices and calibration practices supporting process development effort should be documented or described. New analytical technology and modifications to existing technology are continuously being developed and can be used to characterize the process or the product. Use of these methods is particularly appropriate when they reduce risk by providing greater understanding or the control of product quality. However, analytical methods supporting commercial batch release, you must follow CGMPs Part 210 and 211. Thank you. Hope
you will have clear all the process validation doubts, and any comments you can mention there. Thank you.